Hello my friends, before we start the story, I recommend using your headphones, then relax and live as if you are the hero of the story. I hope you finish the story to the end. Let's go. I still remember the first time I heard his voice. It was crisp, cool, and calm. The voice of a man who knew more about life, death, and the fragile barrier that stood between the two than any sane person ever should. His words, measured, deliberate, like a surgeon's scalpel, cut through the silence with a precision that left me unnerved. But I suppose I should start from the beginning. My name is Elaine Sterling, a name that doesn't quite hold the weight of my real one, but it's enough for now. I was an FBI trainee when I was handed the file, a file that would change my life forever. Inside was a photograph of a man, his eyes locked onto the camera with an unsettling intensity, as if he were staring directly at me, even through the glossy paper. His name was Arthur Cole, though the world had come to know him by another name, one whispered in hushed tones, the surgeon. A criminal psychologist, Arthur had once been revered for his groundbreaking studies in the human mind. That is, until the discovery of his extracurricular activities, gruesome murders, so clinical and precise that they baffled investigators. He had turned his knowledge of the mind into a tool for unspeakable violence. Arthur was not just a killer. He was an artist, a manipulator, a predator with an insatiable appetite for control. The FBI had locked him away in a high-security facility, but even from behind bars, Arthur's influence lingered, like a dark cloud hanging over the bureau. His ability to dissect the human psyche made him invaluable, if not terrifying. Which is why they came to me. You see, there was another killer at large. This one, a shadowy figure they called the Collector, had a penchant for young women. His victims were found mutilated, their skin removed with a horrifying precision. The media had dubbed him that because of the grisly trophies he took from his victims. I was tasked with finding him, but the trail was cold, and the killings were escalating. And so, my superiors handed me Arthur's file, hoping his twisted genius could help me get inside the Collector's mind. But they didn't tell me how dangerous this would be. They didn't warn me that the closer I got to Arthur, the more I'd risk losing myself in the process. The first time I entered the prison to meet him, I felt an oppressive weight settle on my chest. The walls were concrete, sterile, with no warmth or light. It was the kind of place designed to strip a person of their humanity. And yet Arthur thrived here. He was like a spider in its web, waiting for some poor, unsuspecting creature to get too close. As I was led down the corridor to his cell, I could feel the eyes of other inmates following me, their silent stares heavy with menace. But none of that compared to the feeling of Arthur's presence when I finally stood in front of him. There was no cage, no glass barrier between us. Only thick iron bars that seemed too thin, too fragile to contain someone like him. Arthur sat in a chair, his posture unnervingly relaxed, his fingers steepled in front of him. His face was serene, almost friendly, but there was a glint in his eyes, a spark of amusement, as though he had been waiting for me. As though he already knew why I was there. For a moment I hesitated, the words dying in my throat. But I had a job to do. "I'm here about the Collector," I said, forcing the words out. Arthur smiled, a slow, deliberate smile that sent a chill down my spine. "Ah, yes. The Collector. A fascinating case. Tell me, Agent Sterling, do you believe in monsters?" His question caught me off guard. I didn't answer right away. I didn't know how to. "You're here because you want me to help you catch him, yes?" His voice was almost mocking, his eyes never leaving mine. "You think you need me to understand his mind. But the truth is, you're not ready." "Ready for what?" I asked, my voice betraying the unease I felt. Arthur leaned forward, his gaze sharpening. "To face what lies within you." The way he said it, with such certainty, made my skin crawl. He wasn't just talking about the Collector. He was talking about me. I tried to steer the conversation back to the case, laying out the facts, describing the crime scenes, the victims, the patterns we had observed. But Arthur seemed only mildly interested. His attention was focused on me, on my every word, every movement. It was as though he was studying me, dissecting me, peeling back the layers of my psyche one by one. "I'll help you," he finally said, leaning back in his chair. "But I want something in return." I should have seen it coming. Of course, he wouldn't do this out of the goodness of his heart. Arthur Cole was a man who thrived on control, and this was his way of getting it. He wanted to play a game, and I was his opponent, whether I liked it or not. "What do you want?" I asked, already knowing I wouldn't like the answer. "I want to know about you," he said, his smile widening. "Tell me about your childhood. Tell me about your fears. Tell me what keeps you awake at night." I didn't respond. I couldn't. This was exactly the kind of manipulation I had been warned about, the kind of psychological games Arthur excelled at. But the thing was, I needed his help. Lives were at stake, and if Arthur could help me catch the collector, I had no choice but to play along. The next few weeks were a blur of tension and dread. Every visit to Arthur felt like stepping deeper into a labyrinth with no clear way out. He continued to analyze me, probing into my past, my mind, while I fed him the details of the investigation, hoping he'd give me something, anything, that could lead me to the collector. And he did, eventually. But not before he had dug his claws deep into my psyche. "The collector," Arthur mused one day. "He's not killing for pleasure. Not in the way you think, at least. He's searching for something he can't quite find." "What do you mean?" I asked, leaning forward, desperate for a clue. "He's incomplete," Arthur said softly, his eyes gleaming with that same, unsettling amusement. "He believes that by taking pieces of his victims, he can somehow make himself whole." The revelation hit me like a punch to the gut. The collector wasn't just a sadistic killer. He was trying to fix himself, in the most twisted, horrific way imaginable. But before I could ask more, Arthur turned the conversation back to me. "Tell me, Elaine, do you ever feel incomplete?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. But the truth was, his words had struck a nerve. There was something about this case, about the collector's obsession with being whole, that resonated with a deep, buried part of me. And Arthur knew it. He could see it in my eyes, feel it in the way I hesitated before answering his questions. Over time, our conversations became more intense, more personal. I could feel Arthur pulling me deeper into his web, using his words to unravel my defenses, my composure. And yet I kept going back to him, desperate for the insight he could provide, even as I felt myself slipping further into the darkness he thrived in. But Arthur wasn't just manipulating me. He was enjoying it. The more I revealed, the more power he had over me. And I knew, deep down, that this wasn't just about the collector anymore. This was about Arthur and me. About the twisted connection that was growing between us, whether I liked it or not. And then, just when I thought I had him figured out, he dropped a bombshell. "You've been looking for the collector in all the wrong places," Arthur said one day, his voice calm, almost bored. "He's closer than you think." My blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" I asked, my heart pounding in my chest. Arthur leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with a dark, wicked amusement. "Oh, Elaine, you have no idea what you've gotten yourself into." The moment Arthur uttered those words, something inside me shifted. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, and a cold sweat formed at the base of my spine. He was playing with me. I could feel it, his sadistic pleasure in watching me unravel. Yet I couldn't help but bite. The way he said it, the conviction in his voice, it felt like truth, not just some cryptic riddle meant to throw me off balance. "What do you mean he's closer than I think?" My voice was steadier than I expected, though my pulse was racing. Arthur's smile widened as he leaned back in his chair, fingers drumming lazily on the table. "You're so focused on what's in front of you that you haven't looked around. You haven't considered the simplest answer. I need you to stop speaking in riddles," I said, feeling a flare of frustration. He was doing it again, dangling just enough information to keep me hooked, to make me come back for more. Arthur tilted his head, his gaze sharp and unrelenting. "I thought you were smarter than that, Elaine. The collector, he's part of your world. Someone you know. He's closer than you realize." For a moment, I couldn't speak. My mind reeled as I tried to process what he was implying. Part of my world. Someone I knew. My immediate thought went to the bureau, to my colleagues, to the very people I trusted. But the idea seemed ludicrous. No one I worked with could be capable of such horror. Could they? Arthur leaned in again, sensing my confusion. You see, Elaine, people like the Collector, people like me, we don't just come out of nowhere. We leave breadcrumbs, trails of clues. The question is whether you're sharp enough to follow them. I don't understand, I whispered, though a gnawing doubt had already begun to creep into my mind. Arthur sighed, as though disappointed in my inability to keep up. The Collector's obsession with skin, with transforming himself through his victims, it's not just random. He's trying to erase something. He's trying to shed his identity, to become someone new. And yet, he still craves recognition. He wants you to find him, Elaine. That's why he's been so bold. I leaned back, the air feeling heavy around me. Every conversation with Arthur felt like a slow descent into madness, but this time, his words felt dangerously close to the truth. The Collector wasn't hiding in the shadows anymore. He was playing a game, and I was his opponent. I need more, I said, trying to keep my voice from shaking. You know something. Tell me who he is. Arthur laughed softly, a sound devoid of warmth. It's not that simple. I can't just hand him to you on a silver platter. Where's the fun in that? No, you'll have to figure this one out for yourself. Before I could respond, he rose from his chair and stepped closer to the bars that separated us. His face, now just inches away, was eerily calm, his eyes searching mine as though he could see right into my soul. But I'll give you a hint, Elaine. You've seen him before. He's been right in front of you. I stepped back instinctively, my breath catching in my throat. Arthur's words echoed in my mind, and I felt a rush of nausea. The idea that I had crossed paths with this monster, that he had somehow slipped through my fingers, was almost unbearable. That's enough for today, Arthur said, his voice taking on a bored, dismissive tone. He turned away and sat back down, as though the conversation had ended. But I couldn't just walk away, not after what he'd just revealed. I wanted to press him, to demand more answers, but I knew it was useless. Arthur thrived on control, and the more desperate I appeared, the more power he would hold over me. As I left the room, I felt the weight of his gaze on my back, heavy with satisfaction. The door clanged shut behind me, and I found myself standing alone in the sterile hallway, the sound of my heartbeat loud in my ears. Arthur's words lingered, circling around my mind like vultures. Someone you know. The phrase repeated itself over and over, each time more suffocating. Every face I had seen in the past few weeks flashed before my eyes. Agents, victims' families, witnesses. How could I have missed something? Could the Collector really be someone in plain sight, someone I had looked past, or worse, trusted? I needed to think. I needed distance from Arthur's labyrinthine mind games. But the problem was, I couldn't escape him. His words had already planted seeds of doubt, and those seeds were quickly growing into something far darker. Over the next few days, I threw myself into the investigation, desperate for anything that might connect Arthur's cryptic hints to the real world. I pored over case files, studied every detail of the Collector's murders, hoping something would jump out at me, some clue I had missed, some overlooked pattern that would make everything click. But the more I searched, the more elusive the truth became. The Collector had been careful, too careful. His victims were chosen at random, or so it seemed. He never left behind any traces that could lead us to his identity. But Arthur's words continued to gnaw at me. You've seen him before. He's been right in front of you. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Arthur's face, his knowing smile, his chilling amusement. He was enjoying this, watching me stumble in the dark, leading me down dead-end paths. But I couldn't shake the feeling that he had given me something real, some fragment of truth buried in his twisted game. I just had to find it. One night, after hours of fruitless searching, I finally gave in to the exhaustion that had been building for days. I collapsed onto my bed, the case files still spread across the floor, and closed my eyes. But sleep didn't bring relief. Instead, it brought dreams. Dreams of Arthur, standing in his cell, smiling that same cold, predatory smile. In the dream, he held out his hand to me, beckoning me closer, whispering something I couldn't quite hear. I woke with a start, drenched in sweat, my heart racing. The feeling of dread was still with me, as though the dream had followed me into the waking world. I sat up, my mind racing. Arthur's voice echoed in my ears, but this time, something clicked. He's trying to erase something. The words slammed into me like a freight train. The collector wasn't just killing for the sake of killing. He was trying to erase his past, to become someone new. The mutilations, the skinning, it wasn't just about power or control. It was about transformation. Suddenly, a face flashed in my mind, one I hadn't thought about in weeks. Dr. Julian Hartley, the forensic pathologist who had worked on several of the collector's victims. He was quiet, methodical, always professional. But there had been something about him that had made me uneasy, even though I couldn't put my finger on it at the time. He had been helpful, even insightful, offering theories on the killer's motivations that seemed eerily close to what Arthur had described. Too close. Could it be? I sprang out of bed and grabbed my phone, dialing my superior's number without hesitation. As the phone rang, I paced the room, my pulse racing. It felt like pieces of a puzzle were falling into place, but I still couldn't see the full picture. All I had were fragments, suspicions. Agent Sterling? My superior's voice broke through my thoughts. I need you to pull everything we have on Dr. Julian Hartley, I said, trying to keep the urgency out of my voice. Hartley? The pathologist? There was a pause. Elaine, what's going on? I don't know yet, I admitted, but I think we've been looking in the wrong place. I need his file, everything we have on him. Please trust me on this. There was a long silence on the other end of the line, and for a moment, I thought he was going to brush me off. But finally, he spoke. I'll have it pulled. But you better be right about this. I hope I am, I said softly, more to myself than to him. I hung up and sank back onto the bed, my mind spinning. I had no concrete evidence, just a gut feeling, but that feeling was growing stronger by the second. The collector was someone close, someone who had been right under our noses all along. And if Arthur was right, if Julian Hartley was the man I was looking for, I was about to plunge headfirst into a nightmare far darker than I could have imagined. The next morning, I was back at headquarters before the sun had even risen, my mind still racing. The sleepless night had done nothing to quiet the storm of thoughts swirling inside my head. Every minute felt like an eternity as I waited for the file on Dr. Julian Hartley. I needed confirmation, something tangible to prove that my suspicions weren't just the result of Arthur's mind games. The moment the file arrived on my desk, I tore it open, my fingers trembling slightly. The first page was a standard bio, education, professional history, credentials. Hartley had a spotless record, praised for his expertise in forensic pathology. There were no red flags, no warnings of a dark past or a hidden life. But I wasn't looking for the obvious. I dug deeper, flipping through page after page, searching for anything out of the ordinary. Hartley had worked on multiple high-profile cases over the years, including several involving violent homicides. That wasn't unusual for someone in his field. But then I noticed something that made my breath catch. The dates. Hartley had worked on cases connected to skinning and mutilation before the collector's first known victim. In fact, there was a gap, a 3-year stretch where he had relocated to a different state, just as similar murders had occurred there. The cases weren't tied to the collector, but the details of the killings felt eerily familiar. The same pattern of precision, the same twisted ritual of removing the victim's skin. My stomach lurched as I realized what this could mean. Hartley wasn't just a pathologist who happened to work on the collector's victims. He might have been practicing, experimenting, honing his skills. Before I could fully process the implications, my phone buzzed. It was a text from my superior. Meet me in conference room B. Now. I shoved the file into my bag and hurried down the hall. The building was quiet at this early hour, the fluorescent lights casting long, sterile shadows across the floor. The tension in my chest tightened with each step, my instincts screaming that something was about to happen. When I reached the conference room, my superior was already there, along with 2 other agents. The air was thick with unease, and the look in my boss's eyes told me he wasn't entirely sold on my theory yet. But he was curious enough to listen. "Tell me what you've got," he said, motioning for me to sit. I sat down and spread Hartley's file out on the table. "It's more of a theory right now," I began, "but I think Julian Hartley is connected to the Collector. His work history matches up with similar cases that predate the Collector's first known victim. He's been in close proximity to several unsolved murders with the same signature, skin removal, surgical precision. And there's more." I paused, feeling their eyes on me, waiting for the next bombshell. "Arthur Cole hinted that the Collector is someone I've crossed paths with, someone hiding in plain sight. He said the Collector is trying to erase his identity, to transform himself by taking pieces of his victims. That description fits Hartley's behavior." My superior's eyes narrowed. "That's a pretty big leap, Sterling. You're basing this on a hunch and the word of a psychopath." "I know," I admitted. "But it's not just that. Hartley's insights into the case have been too accurate. He's predicted things about the killer's behavior that we haven't shared with anyone. He knew too much." The room fell into a tense silence. One of the other agents, a man named Jensen, leaned forward. "So, what are you suggesting? That Hartley's been feeding us information to throw us off his trail?" "Maybe," I said, my voice tight. "Or maybe he's been using his position to manipulate the investigation from the inside." My superior exchanged a glance with Jensen, then turned back to me. "This is a hell of an accusation, Sterling. If you're wrong, I know what's at stake," I interrupted. "But if I'm right, we're sitting on a ticking time bomb. Hartley has the knowledge, the access, the perfect cover. He could be the Collector, and if we don't act fast, there's no telling how many more lives will be lost." My boss leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples in frustration. "All right. We'll bring him in for questioning. Quietly. If he's involved, we don't want to spook him." Relief flooded through me, but it was short-lived. There was a knock on the door, and a young agent stepped inside, looking pale and nervous. "Sir," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We just got a call. Another body's been found." The room went still. My blood ran cold. I stood up, my legs feeling shaky beneath me. "Where?" "An alley downtown. It fits the profile, sir. Same kind of mutilation as the Collector's victims." My superior cursed under his breath, then turned to me. "Go. Now. Jensen, take a team and secure Hartley's residence. If he's involved, we're not letting him slip away." I grabbed my jacket and hurried out of the room, my heart pounding in my chest. The sense of urgency weighed on me like a lead blanket, knowing that another woman had been brutally killed while I had been sitting in that room, talking in circles. But something else gnawed at me, something darker and more insidious. Arthur. Was this part of his game? Had he known all along that this was about to happen? As I raced to the crime scene, my phone buzzed again. It was a message from an unknown number. "Getting closer, Elaine." My breath hitched. It had to be Arthur. He was watching, tracking my every move, and somehow, he had a hand in this. It was as if he had orchestrated the whole thing, knowing exactly how I would react, how I would chase the breadcrumbs he laid out for me. By the time I reached the crime scene, the area was swarming with officers and agents. Yellow police tape cordoned off the alley, and the sickening smell of death hung in the air. I pushed past the onlookers, flashing my badge to the officer at the perimeter, and ducked under the tape. The body lay in the shadows, partially obscured by a stack of garbage bags. I could already see the telltale signs, deep lacerations, skin peeled back in neat, calculated strips. The Collector's signature. My stomach clenched at the sight, but I forced myself to focus. I needed to stay sharp, to find the clues that would lead me to him. The forensic team was already at work, photographing the scene and collecting evidence. I approached the lead investigator, Agent Miller, who gave me a grim nod. "Same as the others," he said quietly. "Victim's a young woman, late 20s. No ID yet, but the mutilation matches the collector's MO perfectly. Any witnesses?" I asked, scanning the area for anything out of place. "None so far," Miller said. "The body was discovered by a sanitation worker early this morning. We're checking surveillance footage from nearby businesses, but nothing's turned up yet." I knelt beside the body, my gloved hands shaking slightly as I examined the wounds. The precision was undeniable, clean, methodical cuts, as if the killer had all the time in the world. But something about this one felt different. There was a level of brutality here that I hadn't seen in the other victims. It was almost as if the collector had escalated, grown bolder, more reckless. And then I saw it. A small, white card, tucked beneath the edge of the victim's bloodied clothing. My heart skipped a beat as I reached for it, pulling it free with trembling fingers. The card was blank, save for 2 words scrawled in red ink. "Almost there." I stood up, my head spinning. This wasn't just a murder. This was a message for me. Arthur's words came rushing back. "He's closer than you think." Suddenly, everything clicked into place. This wasn't about Julian Hartley. This wasn't about the collector. This was about Arthur, about the twisted game he had been playing with me all along. He had been leading me down this path from the start, manipulating me, pulling the strings behind the scenes. And now, he was taunting me, daring me to catch him before it was too late. I turned on my heel, sprinting back to my car, my mind racing. I needed to get back to the prison, to confront Arthur once and for all. He had answers. Answers that could stop this nightmare before it spiraled even further out of control. As I sped through the city streets, my phone buzzed again. Another message from the unknown number. "Tick-tock, Elaine." I barely remembered the drive back to the prison. My thoughts were tangled, crashing over one another in a frantic rush. The road was a blur, the city nothing but shadows passing in the periphery of my vision. All I could think about was Arthur, how he had played me, how he had pulled me deeper into this nightmare. Every step I'd taken had been on a path he had set. I was going back to him, not because I wanted to, but because I had no choice. He was the only one who could give me answers, the only one who could stop this. The messages, the murder, the taunting, it was all his design. When I finally reached the prison, the sun was still climbing into the sky, its early light pale and cold. I parked haphazardly, barely shutting the door behind me as I rushed toward the entrance. The guard at the front desk gave me a wary look, clearly not expecting a visitor this early, but I flashed my badge and barked out my demand. "I need to see Arthur Cole," I said. "Now." The guard's brows furrowed, but he didn't argue. He knew who I was and, more importantly, who I was here to see. Without another word, he radioed ahead to the security team and gestured for me to follow. As I made my way down the sterile, concrete corridors, the familiar scent of disinfectant and cold steel filled the air. It had always made me uneasy, but today it felt suffocating, like the walls themselves were closing in on me. My stomach twisted with each step, the tension winding tighter and tighter. I felt like I was walking into the lion's den, and maybe I was. Arthur had been controlling the game from behind bars, after all. What would happen if I confronted him? When we reached Arthur's cell, the guard motioned for me to wait as he unlocked the heavy door. The sound of the metal scraping against metal was like a gunshot in the quiet hallway, and I flinched involuntarily. I wasn't ready for this, but I couldn't turn back now. The door swung open, and there he was, Arthur Cole, sitting calmly in the center of his cell, as though he had been expecting me. He looked the same as ever, pale, thin, with that unsettling smile that never quite reached his eyes. The moment he saw me, his smile grew wider, more sinister. "Well, well, well," Arthur drawled, leaning back in his chair. "Elaine, I was wondering when you'd come back." I stepped inside, the door clanging shut behind me, sealing us in together. For a moment, I couldn't speak. I just stood there, staring at him, trying to reconcile the calm, almost smug expression on his face with the chaos he had unleashed. My hands clenched into fists at my sides, and I forced myself to breathe. "You think this is a game?" I finally asked, my voice low and controlled, though every muscle in my body screamed for action. "You think you can toy with people's lives and get away with it?" Arthur tilted his head, his eyes gleaming with amusement. "Isn't that what you've been doing, Elaine? Chasing shadows, following leads, always one step behind. It must be exhausting, trying to stay ahead of someone like me." I took a step closer, glaring at him. "You're behind bars, Arthur. You're not ahead of anything." He chuckled softly, shaking his head. "You still don't get it, do you? This isn't about me. It's never been about me. I'm just a guide, Elaine. I've been showing you the way." "Showing me the way to what?" I demanded, my voice rising in frustration. "Another body? Another murder?" Arthur's smile didn't falter. "You're so close, Elaine. So close to understanding. But you're still missing something. Something important." "I'm done with your games, Arthur," I snapped. "You knew about that murder before it happened. You've been feeding me just enough to keep me on edge, to keep me chasing my tail. But I'm done. You're going to tell me what you know, or I swear I'll—" "You'll what?" Arthur interrupted, his tone suddenly cold and hard. "What exactly do you think you can do to me that hasn't already been done? I'm locked up, Elaine. There's nothing you can threaten me with." His words hit me like a punch to the gut, and for a moment, I was speechless. He was right. There was no leverage I had over him, nothing I could hold over his head. And he knew it. But then I remembered the messages. The taunts. The murder. Arthur was more involved in this than he was letting on, and I wasn't about to let him slip through my fingers. "You don't need me to threaten you," I said quietly, taking another step forward. "You need me because this whole thing, this game you've been playing, it's not over yet. And you know that the only way to keep it going is through me." Arthur's smile flickered, just for a moment, but it was enough. I saw the crack in his armor, the brief flash of something vulnerable beneath the mask. He was controlling the game, yes, but he was also dependent on me to keep playing. "You want me to find him, don't you?" I pressed, my voice steady now. "You've been leading me to him this whole time, dropping hints, feeding me clues. Why? What's in it for you?" Arthur leaned forward, his eyes narrowing as they locked onto mine. For the first time since I'd entered the cell, his playful facade dropped, replaced by something darker. "I want to see how far you'll go," he whispered. "How deep into the darkness you're willing to descend. You and I, we're not so different, Elaine. You want justice, but you crave something more. You want to understand the mind of the monster, to get inside his head. But the problem is, once you're inside, you can never get out." I swallowed hard, trying to push down the wave of nausea that rose in my throat. He was trying to manipulate me again, trying to plant doubts in my mind. But I wasn't going to let him. "You're wrong," I said, my voice stronger than I felt. "I'm nothing like you." Arthur's eyes flashed with anger, but the smile returned, colder than before. "We'll see." The room fell into a heavy silence, the air thick with tension. I could feel Arthur watching me, studying me, trying to find the cracks in my armor. But I refused to give him the satisfaction. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm, and then I spoke again. "I need to know who the collector is," I said quietly. "You know who he is, Arthur. You've known all along." Arthur's smile widened. "You've met him already." My heart skipped a beat, but I kept my voice steady. "Who?" Arthur leaned back in his chair, his eyes gleaming with twisted amusement. "Think, Elaine. You've been so focused on finding a killer that you've forgotten to look at the people closest to you. The ones who've been helping you." A cold chill ran down my spine. My thoughts raced back to Dr. Hartley, to the crime scene, to the way he had always seemed to know more than he should. Could it really be him? Could he be the collector? But then something else struck me, something that made my blood run cold. Arthur had said that I'd met the collector already, but the way he said it, the way he looked at me, It wasn't just about someone I worked with. It was more personal. Closer. My mind reeled as I thought back over the past few weeks, to the people I had trusted, the people who had been by my side throughout the investigation. And then, like a flash of lightning, it hit me. Julian Hartley had been a distraction. The real danger had been right in front of me all along. "Oh my God!" I whispered, the realization crashing over me like a tidal wave. "It's not Hartley. It's..." The sound of a key turning in the lock interrupted my thoughts, and the door to the cell swung open. The guard stepped inside, glancing between me and Arthur with a nervous expression. "Agent Sterling," he said hesitantly, "there's been another development. You need to come with me." I turned to Arthur, my mind still spinning, but he just smiled, his eyes gleaming with satisfaction. "You're almost there, Elaine," he said softly. "Almost." I didn't say anything. I couldn't. My throat felt tight, my heart pounding in my chest as I followed the guard out of the cell. Whatever had just happened, whatever new piece of the puzzle had fallen into place, I wasn't sure I was ready to face it. But there was no turning back now. I was too far in. Too deep. As we walked through the prison halls, my phone buzzed again. Another message from the unknown number. "Time's running out, Elaine." I stopped in my tracks, staring down at the screen as dread flooded through me. Arthur was right. I was close. Too close. But the question was, close to what? I followed the guard down the corridor, my mind still reeling from the conversation with Arthur. The pieces of the puzzle were shifting, realigning themselves in ways I hadn't anticipated. My heart pounded in my chest as I tried to push away the overwhelming sense of dread, but it clung to me like a second skin. Who had sent me that last text? And what did Arthur mean by, "almost there"? My hands trembled as I reached for my phone again, scanning the message, hoping to find something I had missed, some hidden clue. But there was nothing, just a simple, chilling reminder that I was running out of time. The guard led me to the operations room, where a cluster of agents were huddled around a large screen displaying a live video feed. I recognized Agent Jensen immediately, his face drawn tight with worry. He glanced up as I entered the room, his expression darkening. "What's going on?" I asked, stepping forward. Jensen motioned toward the screen. "You're going to want to see this." I followed his gaze, my stomach twisting as I focused on the grainy footage. It was a surveillance feed from somewhere downtown, an alleyway littered with trash. At first, it looked like any ordinary night, quiet and uneventful, until a figure appeared on the edge of the screen, barely visible in the shadows. My breath caught in my throat as I leaned in closer. It was Dr. Julian Hartley. He moved slowly, cautiously, as if he were trying to avoid being seen. He was wearing a long, dark coat, his face obscured by the hood. My heart raced as I watched him approach a side door in the alley, pulling out a key and unlocking it with practiced ease. He slipped inside the building without a second glance. "What the hell?" I whispered, more to myself than to anyone else. "When was this?" "About half an hour ago," Jensen replied grimly. "We've been tracking him since the last body was found. He hasn't made any obvious moves until now." I stared at the screen, a thousand thoughts crashing through my mind. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the confirmation that Hartley was involved. But why now? Why had he waited until now to slip up, to show his hand? "It's the same building where the body was found," Jensen continued, his voice low. "The alleyway behind it connects to the main street. We've got agents on site, but we wanted to wait for you before moving in." I didn't hesitate. "Let's go." We moved quickly, a small team of agents assembling in minutes, the tension thick in the air. There was no time to waste. Hartley had shown his cards, and we couldn't afford to lose him now. I was running on adrenaline, my mind racing as I tried to piece together the final connections. Hartley might be the collector, or he might be working with him. Either way, this was our chance to end it. As we sped through the streets toward the building, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Arthur's words haunted me. Asterisk, you've met him already. Asterisk, he'd been so certain, so confident that I was missing something right in front of me. But what? Hartley seemed like the obvious answer, but Arthur's games were never that simple. When we arrived at the building, the team moved into position, guns drawn, ready for anything. The alley was eerily quiet, the only sound the soft hum of the city in the distance. My breath came in short bursts, my heart hammering in my chest as I followed Jensen to the side door, the same one Hartley had entered. "We've got eyes on the back exit," Jensen whispered, nodding toward another team positioned at the far end of the alley. "If he tries to run, we'll cut him off." I nodded, gripping my gun tightly. This was it. The end game. Jensen signaled for the door to be breached, and the team moved in swiftly, the doors swinging open with a creak. The inside of the building was dark, the air thick with the stench of mold and decay. I covered my nose with the back of my hand, trying not to gag as we moved deeper into the building. It didn't take long for the horror to reveal itself. We found the first room on the left, a small, dingy space that looked like it had been abandoned for years. But inside, the walls were lined with photographs, hundreds of them, pinned up in neat, methodical rows. My blood ran cold as I recognized the faces staring back at me. The victims. There were photographs of every single one of the collector's victims, arranged in order, their eyes staring blankly into the camera. Some of the photos were old, from cases that had been closed years ago, but others were recent, too recent. I took a step closer, my eyes scanning the wall, trying to make sense of it all. There were notes scrawled beneath each photo, details about the victims, about their lives, their routines. It was as if someone had been studying them, learning their every move before they were taken. "This is sick," Jensen muttered, his face pale as he glanced around the room. But my attention was fixed on something else, something that made my blood turn to ice. In the center of the wall, in the very heart of the twisted display, was a photograph of me. My own face stared back at me, the image taken from a distance, just like the others. There were no notes beneath it, no details about my life or my movements, but the message was clear. I was part of this. I had been marked. I stumbled back, my pulse racing, my mind screaming for me to run, to get out. But before I could process what I was seeing, a sound echoed from the hallway, a faint creak of floorboards, barely audible. Hartley. I motioned for the team to follow as I crept toward the door, my gun raised, my heart pounding in my ears. We moved silently, following the noise down the narrow hallway, deeper into the building. The further we went, the more oppressive the air became, the darkness closing in around us. And then, we heard it, a soft, muffled sobbing. My blood ran cold as we reached the door at the end of the hall. The sobbing grew louder, more desperate, and I could feel the fear radiating from the agents behind me. Jensen nodded, signaling that we were ready to breach. With a single swift motion, we kicked the door open. The room was small, dimly lit by a single flickering light bulb hanging from the ceiling. And in the center of the room, bound to a chair, was a woman. She was gagged, her eyes wide with terror, her clothes torn and bloodied. My stomach twisted as I realized who she was, one of the missing women, presumed dead. But she wasn't dead. She was bait. Before I could react, there was a flash of movement from the corner of the room, and I barely had time to register Hartley's figure lunging toward me. He moved with an almost unnatural speed, his face twisted in a grotesque smile, his eyes wild with madness. I fired my gun without thinking, the deafening crack of the shot echoing through the room. Hartley staggered back, clutching his shoulder, blood seeping through his fingers. But the smile didn't leave his face. "You think you've won?" he hissed, his voice low and ragged. "You think this is over?" I stepped forward, my gun still trained on him. "It's over, Hartley. We've got you." But Hartley only laughed, a cold, hollow sound that sent a chill down my spine. "You still don't get it, do you? I was never the one you were looking for." My heart skipped a beat, but I didn't waver. "What are you talking about?" Hartley's eyes gleamed with twisted satisfaction as he leaned closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "You've been playing his game all along. He's the one pulling the strings. And you're just a puppet." Before I could respond, Hartley collapsed, unconscious from the blood loss. Jensen and the team moved in, securing him as I stood there, my mind reeling. This wasn't over. Arthur had been right. I had been chasing shadows, following the wrong lead, and now the real threat was still out there, waiting, watching. And I was running out of time. As the paramedics arrived to tend to the injured woman and Hartley was taken into custody, I stood in the darkened room, staring at the wall of photographs. The weight of everything crashed down on me, suffocating me. Arthur had warned me. I had been so focused on finding the collector that I hadn't seen the bigger picture, the person who had been manipulating everything from the start. I wasn't just hunting a serial killer. I was hunting a mastermind. And if I didn't figure it out soon, I would be next. The adrenaline still coursed through my veins as I stepped back from the chaos in the dimly lit room. I watched the paramedics rush to the woman bound to the chair, while other agents secured Hartley, who lay unconscious, a pool of blood spreading beneath him. I felt a mix of relief and dread. Yes, we had caught Hartley, but he was not the end of the nightmare. The real monster was still out there, lurking in the shadows, pulling the strings. As the agents worked, I slipped out of the room, needing to clear my head. The hallway felt claustrophobic, the air thick with the scent of mildew and despair. I paced back and forth, trying to process everything I had learned. Hartley's words echoed in my mind. "You've been playing his game all along." Who was he talking about? Who was the real puppet master? I pulled out my phone, fingers trembling as I scrolled through the messages again, searching for a clue I might have missed. But the screen was unhelpful, just a series of taunts, cryptic lines meant to confuse and terrorize me. I leaned against the cold wall, closing my eyes. Images of the victims flashed through my mind, faces I had seen in the photographs, lives cut short. Each victim had a story, a family, and now they were just another marker in the mind of a madman. I felt a surge of anger rise within me. I couldn't let this go on. Suddenly, my phone buzzed in my hand, and I nearly dropped it. It was a new message, an unknown number, just like the others. My heart raced as I opened it. Asterisk, you think you've got it all figured out? The game is far from over. Meet me where it all began. Asterisk. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. Where it all began. The phrase was loaded, imbued with significance that made my stomach twist. The last crime scene? The spot where the first victim had been found? Or was it something more personal? Before I could think too hard about it, I was jolted from my thoughts by Jensen, who appeared at the doorway. His face was pale, his eyes wide. "Elaine, we need to talk." "What is it?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "We've got a problem. Hartley's unconscious but still breathing. He's refusing to say anything. His lawyer's already trying to pull him out of the investigation. They're claiming he's mentally unfit. We can't let that happen." "Not just Hartley," I said, urgency in my voice. "He mentioned someone else. Someone we're not even aware of." Jensen looked at me, confusion crossing his face. "What do you mean?" "Before he passed out, he said I was chasing the wrong person. He talked about a puppet master. I think there's someone else involved in this, someone behind the scenes." He nodded, digesting my words. "Do you have any idea who he might be?" "Not yet. But I need to find out. I need to go back to the beginning." "Back to the first victim?" he asked, his brows furrowing. "Yeah," I confirmed. "We need to revisit the crime scene, dig deeper. There has to be something we missed." "I'll assemble a team," he said, already moving toward the door. "But Elaine, be careful. If there's someone else out there, we don't know how dangerous they are." I nodded, adrenaline coursing through me again. "I will. I just need a little time." As Jensen left to gather the team, I felt the weight of the moment pressing down on me. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking into a trap, but I had no choice. I needed to know who was really orchestrating this nightmare, and I was running out of time. The drive back to the crime scene was tense, filled with an uneasy silence. I barely registered the passing scenery, my mind consumed with the possibility of discovering new evidence, new connections. As we arrived, the sun was setting, casting a crimson hue across the sky, an ominous backdrop for what lay ahead. The area was cordoned off with police tape, remnants of the initial investigation still visible. The trees swayed gently in the evening breeze, but it felt like a haunted stillness had settled over the place. I stepped out of the car, my heart pounding, and surveyed the scene. Memories flooded back, the frantic chaos of that night, the terror of discovering the first victim's body. "Okay, team," I said, my voice steady as I gathered everyone around me. "We're looking for anything that might have been overlooked, anything that could lead us to the person behind this." We spread out, combing through the area methodically. I felt a sense of urgency pushing me forward, every moment ticking away as if it were a countdown to disaster. The atmosphere felt charged, thick with tension, as the sun dipped lower in the sky. I returned to the exact spot where the first body had been found, the ground still disturbed from the initial excavation. I crouched down, studying the earth, the surrounding brush. There had to be something, some clue hidden in plain sight. As I sifted through the debris, a glint of metal caught my eye. I reached down, brushing away dirt and leaves, revealing a small, ornate keychain. It was a delicate thing, engraved with intricate designs that were surprisingly beautiful amid the horror of the surroundings. "What have you got?" Jensen asked, approaching cautiously. "A keychain," I replied, turning it over in my hand. "Looks like it might belong to someone. Let's get it back to the lab," he said. "We can run prints." As I pocketed the keychain, something else caught my attention, a small, crumpled piece of paper wedged between the roots of a nearby tree. I pulled it free, unfolding it carefully. My breath hitched as I scanned the scribbled notes, a list of names, dates, and locations. "This is it," I breathed, feeling a surge of hope. "This could be a list of victims. Look at the dates, they correspond to the other murders." Jensen leaned closer, studying the paper. "We need to get this analyzed. If we can tie it to Hartley or anyone else, we might have something concrete." As we continued to search, I felt a growing sense of urgency. Each clue we uncovered seemed to push me closer to the truth, but I could feel a shadow looming just beyond my reach. The puppet master was still out there, and I was no closer to figuring out who it was. Suddenly, my phone buzzed again, making me jump. I pulled it out, the screen illuminating my face in the dim light. Another message. "Asterisk, you're closer than you think. Just look around. Asterisk." My heart raced as I glanced around the area, a cold sweat breaking out on my brow. I felt eyes on me, a palpable sense of dread creeping in. I had to keep my focus, had to stay grounded, but every instinct told me to run. "Elaine!" Jensen called, pulling me from my thoughts. "We need to regroup." I nodded, forcing myself to shake off the anxiety as I joined the team. We gathered around the vehicle, the tension in the air thickening. "We found a keychain and what looks like a list of victims," I said, my voice steady despite the chaos in my mind. "We need to get this information back to the lab ASAP." As we loaded everything into the car, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the landscape. The darkness felt heavy, pressing down on me as I scanned the surroundings, every instinct screaming that I wasn't alone. As we drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that the puppet master was observing our every move, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. I clenched my jaw, steeling myself for whatever came next. We arrived back at the precinct, and I headed straight for the evidence room, my mind racing with possibilities. I needed to know who the names on that list belonged to. I needed to find out what Hartley and the other players were hiding. I pulled the list from my pocket, spreading it out on the evidence table as the forensic team gathered around. I could feel the anticipation building in the air as we began cross-referencing the names with our records. Then, a familiar voice broke through my concentration. "Looking for something?" I turned, finding myself face to face with Arthur. He stood in the doorway, a smirk on his lips, his eyes glinting with malicious delight. "Get out!" I snapped, fury boiling beneath my skin. "You don't belong here." "Oh, but I do," he replied smoothly, stepping further into the room. "After all, I'm the one who knows the truth." You're in way over your head, Elaine. You need me. Why would I ever trust you? I shot back, my heart racing. You've played me from the beginning. Arthur's smile widened, and he leaned against the doorframe, his posture relaxed as if he were merely an observer in this twisted game. Trust is a fickle thing, isn't it? But whether you like it or not, I hold the key to this entire puzzle. I can help you finish what you started. I shook my head, trying to push down the anger. I don't need your help. I'm done playing your games. Are you? Arthur challenged, tilting his head slightly. You're closer than you think, but you'll never make it without my guidance. There are pieces of this that you haven't even begun to. Arthur's presence was suffocating, a dark cloud that hovered over the evidence room. I felt a rush of frustration coursing through me. He had woven himself into this nightmare, and now he stood there, smug and infuriatingly composed. You don't know what you're getting into, I said, trying to keep my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. You're just a distraction, another piece in this sick game. He chuckled softly, the sound sending a shiver down my spine. Am I? Or am I the only one who truly understands the stakes here? You think you're hunting a killer, but you're really playing with fire. I stepped closer, narrowing my eyes at him. What do you want, Arthur? Why are you really here? Simple, he replied, his tone shifting to something more serious. I want to help you find the truth. You need to connect the dots before it's too late. The longer you wait, the closer you get to becoming a victim yourself. I felt the weight of his words settle over me. It was a reminder of the threats I faced, not just from the killer but from the manipulation lurking at every turn. My phone buzzed again in my pocket, but I ignored it, unwilling to let anything distract me from this confrontation. Why should I believe anything you say? I shot back, my voice rising. You've been playing both sides, and you think I'll just take your word for it? Arthur took a step forward, his expression unyielding. Because deep down, you know you need me. You've been chasing shadows, Elaine, while I've been watching everything unfold. The real question is whether you're ready to confront the darkness or if you'll let it consume you. I turned away, unwilling to give him the satisfaction of seeing my uncertainty. I'll find the answers on my own. Suit yourself, he replied, his tone dripping with false sweetness. But remember, I'm always just a phone call away. With that, he slipped out of the room, leaving behind an unsettling silence. I stood there, the tension still thick in the air, torn between anger and the undeniable pull of his words. I knew I had to focus. The names on the list could be crucial to unraveling this mystery. As the forensic team worked, I began matching the names on the list to our records, each name sparking a flicker of recognition. Some were familiar, others I had only heard of in passing. But as I scrolled through the data, a pattern began to emerge, connections between the victims that suggested something deeper, a network of terror that was more extensive than I had imagined. Elaine, Jensen called from across the room, pulling me from my thoughts. We just got a report back on that keychain. I turned, eager for any new lead. What did they find? It belonged to a woman named Sarah Miller. She was reported missing 3 weeks ago. Her family thought she had run away, but it seems she may have been taken, he explained, his voice grave. I felt a sickening knot tighten in my stomach. So she's another victim? Possibly. But there's more. Sarah was last seen in the vicinity of the first crime scene. Her disappearance might connect to the same person we're after. Get me everything we have on her, I instructed, my mind racing with possibilities. We need to know if there's any link between her and Hartley or the other victims. As Jensen walked away to gather the information, I returned to the list of names, my fingers flying over the keyboard as I entered each one into the database. The sense of urgency surged within me. I could feel the threads of the case tightening, drawing me closer to the truth. Just as I thought I was making progress, my phone buzzed again. This time, I pulled it out, bracing myself for another cryptic message. Asterisk, you're still missing the most important piece. The beginning isn't where you think it is. Find the one who knows. Asterisk. My heart raced. What did that even mean? I stared at the screen, frustration boiling inside me. I had to decipher these messages, find the hidden meanings that Arthur had so expertly woven into this nightmare. "Elaine, we've got something!" Jensen called, interrupting my thoughts once more. I turned, my pulse quickening as he approached, a file in his hands. "I've got the background on Sarah Miller. She had connections to several of the other victims. They all worked at the same bar downtown, and they were friends." "Interesting," I said, looking through the documents. "If they were close, it's possible the killer targeted them because of their connections." "Exactly. And there's something else." Jensen hesitated, his eyes flickering with concern. "Sarah's brother, Mark, has a history of mental illness. He was in and out of facilities for a few years. He's been clean for a while, but I think we should interview him. He could have insights we need." I nodded, the pieces beginning to fall into place. "Let's set up that interview. If there's any chance he knows something, we can't afford to overlook it." As I turned back to the table, my thoughts swirling, I felt a sudden chill wash over me. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched again. Glancing around the room, I saw nothing out of the ordinary, but the sensation gnawed at my instincts. I pushed it aside, focusing instead on the case at hand. "We need to move quickly," I said, more to myself than anyone else. "The longer we wait, the more danger we're in." As Jensen began making calls to set up the interview, I pulled out the list again, studying it more closely. The names of the victims danced before my eyes, and I couldn't help but think about the twisted connections that might exist between them. Who else could be involved in this web of horror? Suddenly, a thought struck me. What if the key to everything lay not just in the victims, but in their lives before they were taken? If they were connected, there had to be someone who knew more about their backgrounds. "Jensen, what about the bar they worked at? It could be a crucial lead," I suggested, my excitement growing. "Let's go there. Maybe someone remembers something, anything that could help." "Good idea," he agreed, his demeanor shifting to match my urgency. "Let's grab a couple of agents and head over." As we prepared to leave, my phone buzzed one last time. Another message. Asterisk, "The shadows are closing in. You're not safe. Look behind you." Asterisk. A cold chill ran down my spine, and I spun around, scanning the room. My heart raced as I spotted a figure disappearing down the hallway. It was too quick to identify, but the feeling of dread surged again. "Did you see that?" I called to Jensen, who had just finished gathering his things. "See what?" he asked, brow furrowed. "That person just walked out of here, someone in a dark coat," I replied, urgency threading through my words. "I didn't see anyone," he said, looking toward the door. "But we should keep moving. We don't have time to waste." I hesitated, my instincts screaming at me to investigate further, but I nodded. The urgency of the investigation pushed me forward, overriding the anxiety bubbling within. I couldn't let fear dictate my actions. I needed to be strong, focused. As we left the precinct, I cast one last glance over my shoulder, the feeling of being watched still nagging at me. The bar was just a short drive away, but every moment felt laden with danger, every second ticking down towards something inevitable. Once we arrived at the bar, a dimly lit establishment tucked away in a quiet part of town, I felt the weight of the world pressing down on me. The air was thick with tension, the murmur of voices mingling with the clink of glasses. I glanced around, noting the patrons, their faces a mix of joy and sorrow, unaware of the darkness that had touched their lives. "We need to talk to whoever was working the night Sarah disappeared," I said, scanning the crowd. "Let's split up and see what we can find." Jensen nodded, and we went our separate ways, each searching for anyone who might provide insights into the victims' lives. I approached the bar, where a weary bartender wiped down the counter, a look of resignation etched across his face. "Excuse me," I said, leaning closer. "I'm with the FBI. I need to ask you a few questions about Sarah Miller and her friends." The bartender looked up, his expression shifting from annoyance to concern. "Yeah, I remember Sarah. She worked here, but it's been a while. What happened to her?" I hesitated, the weight of the truth heavy on my heart. "She's missing," and we're trying to figure out what happened. Do you remember anything unusual about her or her friends? The bartender sighed, his eyes drifting to the far end of the bar. They were a tight-knit group, always together. But there was something strange going on, some guy they kept talking about. He'd come in, hang around, but I never got a good look at him. Seemed shady though. Shady how? I pressed, leaning closer, urgency tinging my voice. Just off. He never ordered anything, just sat there watching them. I asked Sarah about him once, and she got weirdly defensive. Told me not to worry about it. But I could tell she was scared. My stomach twisted as I processed his words. Do you know where the bartender's words hung in the air, heavy with implications? Do you remember anything else about him? A name, a description? I pressed, desperate for more details. He rubbed his temples, trying to recall. He was tall, maybe 6 feet, with dark hair. Always wore a hoodie, kept his head down. Didn't fit in with the rest of the crowd. I thought he might be trouble. Did Sarah mention anything specific about him? Did he ever speak to her or her friends? I asked, my pulse quickening. The pieces were beginning to form a picture, but I needed clarity. Not that I know of. But she was different in the weeks leading up to her disappearance. More reserved, jumpy even. It's like she was looking over her shoulder all the time. I figured it was just work stress, but now... He trailed off, shaking his head. Can you think of any specific dates he was here? I asked, hoping to tie his presence to a timeline of events. Maybe a couple of weeks before she went missing. I didn't think much of it then. It's a bar, people come and go, he said with a shrug. Thank you. You've been really helpful, I said, feeling the urgency building. I needed to find out who this man was. He could be the missing link in the investigation. Just as I turned to find Jensen, my phone buzzed again. Another message, another twist in this dark tale. Asterisk, you're close, but beware. He's watching you now, asterisk. A chill ran down my spine. I quickly scanned the bar, looking for anyone who seemed out of place, anyone who might be watching me. But the patrons were engrossed in their conversations, oblivious to the storm brewing around them. I found Jensen by the entrance, looking more anxious than before. Did you get anything? He asked, his voice low. Yeah, some guy has been lurking around the victims, but I need to dig deeper. We should head back and see if we can track down surveillance footage from the bar. Maybe we can spot him, I replied, urgency creeping into my tone. Good idea, he agreed, glancing around warily. But let's not stick around too long. I don't like the feeling in here. As we made our way back to the car, I couldn't shake the feeling of being followed. Every rustle of leaves, every footstep seemed amplified. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see a shadowy figure emerging from the crowd. Once we were in the car, I felt a momentary relief wash over me. But it was short-lived. My mind raced as I recounted everything I had learned. The bartender's account was crucial, but it raised more questions than answers. Who was this man, and why had he fixated on Sarah and her friends? We drove back to the precinct in silence, each lost in our thoughts. As we entered, the familiar hum of activity surrounded us, but I felt increasingly isolated, the pressure mounting with each passing moment. Let's head to the tech room, I said, eager to dig into the surveillance footage. We need to see if we can identify this guy. As we entered the room, the dim light flickered overhead, casting eerie shadows against the walls. The tech team was busy reviewing footage, screens flickering with scenes from the bar, the camera angles offering glimpses of the patrons. Hey, we need to pull footage from a couple of weeks ago, I said, my voice firm. There's a possible suspect we need to track. The technician nodded and began pulling up the relevant dates. As the clips loaded, I felt the tension build in the air. Every frame that flickered by felt like it could reveal the key to unraveling this mystery. Finally, the footage from the bar appeared on the screen. I leaned in closer, heart racing as I scanned the faces. People laughed and drank, blissfully unaware of the darkness that lingered just out of sight. There! I shouted suddenly, pointing to a figure in a dark hoodie, slouched at the end of the bar. That has to be him. The technician paused the video, zooming in. My breath caught as I studied the man's features. His face was obscured by shadows, but the posture and movements were eerily familiar. Can we enhance that? I asked, feeling the urgency bubbling inside me. Sure, give me a second, the technician replied, his fingers flying over the keyboard. The image sharpened, and I leaned in, scanning for any recognizable traits. As the clarity improved, I noticed a distinctive tattoo peeking out from under the edge of the hoodie, a snake coiled around a dagger. It sent a chill through me. I had seen that tattoo before. Wait a minute, I said, piecing it together. This is the same tattoo we found on one of the previous victims. Jensen's eyes widened as realization dawned on him. So, he's been connected to the murders all along. We need to get this information to the team. Absolutely, I said, adrenaline surging through me. But we also need to figure out who he is and where he might be hiding. As we gathered the details and planned our next steps, I felt the weight of time pressing down on me. I could sense the walls closing in. We had to move quickly before he could slip away again. Just then, my phone buzzed once more, pulling my attention away from the screen. I glanced down, and my stomach dropped as I read the new message. Asterisk, you think you're close? Don't underestimate him. He knows you're coming. Asterisk. Panic gripped me, but I fought to stay calm. We need to find out who this guy is, and fast, I said, looking to Jensen. There's no time to waste. Agreed, he replied, his brow furrowed in concentration. Let's check missing persons reports again, see if anyone matching that tattoo has been picked up recently. We dove into the records, poring over images and names, the urgency hanging heavy in the air. Each passing moment felt like a countdown, every second closer to danger. As we searched, I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on me, the weight of being pursued lingering in my thoughts. Then, a breakthrough. One of the missing persons reports featured a photo that made my heart race. The same tattoo, the same build. Jensen, look at this! I exclaimed, pointing to the screen. This is our guy. His name is Caleb Monroe. He has a history of violence and has been linked to other unsolved cases. This changes everything, Jensen said, excitement lacing his voice. We need to act on this now. If he's involved, he could have information about the victims or their connections. Just as we were about to formulate a plan, an alarm blared through the precinct, shattering the tense atmosphere. The lights flickered, and chaos erupted as agents scrambled for answers. What's happening? I shouted over the noise, adrenaline surging again. Security breach! Someone's in the building! An agent yelled, urgency lacing their voice. My heart raced as I exchanged a worried glance with Jensen. We need to get out of here. They could be after us. We rushed toward the exit, adrenaline pushing us forward. As we navigated the halls, I felt the tension mount. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat, every corner a potential ambush. We finally reached the main exit, but my instincts screamed at me to pause. Wait. We can't just run blindly into this. Elaine, we need to move, Jensen urged, glancing back down the corridor. I know, but we can't be reckless. If they're after us, we need to outsmart them, I said, my mind racing for options. Then let's split up, he suggested, urgency driving his words. We can cover more ground that way. I'll meet you at the car. No, I exclaimed, fear coursing through me. We stick together. It's safer that way. Just as I finished speaking, a figure appeared at the end of the corridor, a shadowy outline against the emergency lights. My heart raced as I recognized the silhouette. Jensen, behind you! I shouted. But it was too late. The figure lunged forward, the darkness swallowing him whole. I felt my heart drop as the chaos around us intensified. The alarms blared louder, the echo reverberating in my ears. Run! I screamed, grabbing Jensen's arm and pulling him away from the advancing threat. We sprinted toward the nearest exit, fear propelling us forward as the adrenaline surged. We burst through the doors and into the parking lot, the cool night air hitting us like a wave. I spotted our car, but there was no time to waste. We jumped inside, my fingers shaking as I fumbled for the keys. "Drive!" I urged, glancing back at the building, the chaos inside spilling into the night. Jensen's foot pressed down on the accelerator, and we sped away, the lights of the precinct fading behind us. But even as we drove, I could feel the tension lingering, the darkness still looming close behind. "Where to now?" he asked, glancing at me, his expression a mixture of determination and fear. "We need to regroup and find Caleb Monroe," I said, my mind racing. "He might be our only link to uncovering the truth." As we drove into the night, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that settled over me. We were closer than ever to unraveling this web of horror, but I also knew the drive felt endless, the weight of uncertainty pressing down on us as we navigated through the city's darkened streets. My mind was racing, piecing together the fragments of information we had gathered. The threat was tangible, the shadows closing in, but I couldn't let fear consume me. Not now. "Where do we even start looking for Monroe?" Jensen asked, glancing at me as he maneuvered the car through the quiet roads. I pulled out my notebook, scanning the notes I'd taken during our investigation. "He has a history of moving around, but there's a chance he frequents the same places. The bar might have some connections, but we should also check out any local hangouts for people with his background. Let's hit the local shelters first," Jensen suggested. "Sometimes those with nowhere to go end up in places like that." "Good idea," I replied, the urgency in my voice matching the pounding of my heart. "There's one a few blocks from here. We might catch a lead." As we approached the shelter, I felt a surge of determination. This could be the turning point in our investigation. We parked and quickly entered the building, the atmosphere inside heavy with tension and uncertainty. The shelter was dimly lit, filled with the low hum of conversations and the scent of coffee mingling with the chill of the night air. I approached the front desk, where a tired-looking woman was sorting through paperwork. "Excuse me," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "We're looking for someone, Caleb Monroe. Have you seen him?" The woman looked up, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Caleb? Yeah, he's been here a few times. Why? Is he in trouble? We're trying to find him for his safety," I replied, forcing a calm demeanor despite the urgency coursing through me. "Can you tell us when he was last here?" "Just a couple of nights ago," she said, her brow furrowing. "He left in a hurry. Didn't say where he was going. Did he mention anything about why he was in town or where he might be staying?" Jensen chimed in. She shook her head. "No, just that he needed to lay low. I got the impression he was running from something." I exchanged a glance with Jensen, my heart racing at her words. "Did you see anyone with him? Anyone unusual?" "Not really. He kept to himself, but I remember him talking to a couple of other guys. They looked rough, definitely not from around here," she said, glancing around as if recalling the scene. "Can you describe them?" I pressed, leaning closer. "One had a scar on his face, the other had a big tattoo on his arm, something aggressive looking," she replied, her voice softening. "They were whispering to each other, acting like they were planning something." Jensen and I exchanged a quick look, a silent understanding passing between us. This was our chance to track down Monroe and uncover more about the twisted connections to the victims. "Do you have any idea where they might hang out?" I asked, desperate for more leads. "There's a dive bar a few blocks from here. It's a sketchy place. Lots of shady people come and go. But if he's with them, that's probably where he'd be," she said. "Thank you," I said, feeling a surge of gratitude. "You've been a big help." As we stepped back outside, the chill of the night air hit us like a wave. I couldn't shake the feeling that time was slipping through our fingers. We had to move quickly. "Let's head to that bar," Jensen said, determination etched across his face. As we drove through the darkened streets, the anticipation grew heavier. Each turn brought us closer to the answers we desperately sought. My mind raced with thoughts of Monroe and the potential danger he could be in, caught up with people who might know too much. We finally arrived at the dive bar, A dimly lit building with flickering neon signs and a crowd that looked as rough as the exterior. The bass from the music thumped through the walls, creating an unsettling atmosphere. "Stay alert," I warned, scanning the parking lot as we approached the entrance. "We don't know who we're dealing with." Inside, the bar was bustling, the air thick with smoke and the sound of laughter mingled with shouts. I felt the tension in my shoulders as we stepped further in, our eyes scanning the room for any sign of Monroe or the individuals described by the shelter worker. "Let's split up," I suggested, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'll check the back area. You take the bar. Be careful," he cautioned, concern evident in his tone. I nodded, steeling myself for what lay ahead. As I made my way through the crowd, I could feel the eyes of patrons on me, the atmosphere thickening with every step. I moved to the back, where a pool table stood surrounded by a group of rowdy men. "Excuse me," I called, trying to project confidence. "Have any of you seen Caleb Monroe?" The men paused, their laughter dying down as they exchanged glances. One with a particularly imposing presence stepped forward, crossing his arms. "Why do you want to know about him?" "I'm just looking out for his safety. He could be in trouble," I replied, forcing myself to maintain eye contact despite the growing unease in my stomach. "Trouble? That boy's been nothing but trouble since he showed up here," the man sneered. "He's been running with a bad crowd. You'd do best to stay away." I narrowed my eyes, sensing the underlying threat in his words. "I need to find him. It's important. You're not the only one looking for him, sweetheart," he said, leaning in closer. "If he's not careful, he might end up in a real mess." Feeling the walls closing in, I stepped back, the tension crackling in the air. I had to find Monroe before it was too late. "If you see him, tell him I'm looking for him. It's urgent." The man smirked, but I turned away, scanning the room for Jensen. I spotted him at the bar, deep in conversation with another patron. The man looked nervous, glancing around as if expecting someone to show up. "Jensen!" I called, making my way toward him. As I approached, I could see the tension etched on his face. "What did you find out?" "Not much, just some threats about Monroe. But that guy over there looks like he knows something." I gestured toward the nervous patron. "We should talk to him." Before we could approach, the front door swung open, and a wave of cold air rushed through the bar. My heart sank as I spotted a figure entering, a tall man in a dark hoodie, the same build I had seen on the surveillance footage. "Monroe!" I shouted instinctively, my voice cutting through the noise. The figure froze, his head snapping toward me. I saw a flash of recognition in his eyes before he turned to bolt for the back exit. "Jensen, he's getting away!" I yelled, and we both took off after him. We pushed through the crowd, weaving between patrons as we chased Monroe, adrenaline surging in my veins. He burst through the back door and into the alley, and I could hear the thud of our footsteps echoing behind him. "Stop!" I shouted, but he didn't slow down. He was fast, darting around corners, desperately trying to escape. We sprinted after him, determination pushing us forward. The alley was dark, littered with debris, making every step treacherous. Just as we rounded a corner, I saw him ahead, glancing back as he realized we were gaining on him. "Caleb!" I called, hoping to reason with him. "We just want to talk." But he didn't stop. Instead, he turned sharply down another alley, and we followed, the chase consuming us both. My heart raced, the pounding in my chest matching the urgency of the moment. Just as I thought we were closing in, Monroe stumbled, nearly falling over a pile of trash. It gave us the chance we needed. I reached out, grabbing his arm just as he regained his balance. "Let go of me!" he shouted, struggling against my grip. "Caleb, please! We need to talk!" I pleaded, desperate to get through to him. He looked at me, wild-eyed, fear etched across his features. "I don't want anything to do with this. You don't know what you're messing with. Then tell me. We can help you," I urged, sensing his desperation. "No one can help me," he spat, pulling away. "You have no idea what's coming for you." Jensen finally caught up, breathing heavily. What's going on? Why are you running? Because he's not safe, Monroe shouted, looking back toward the mouth of the alley, panic evident in his eyes. You don't understand. They're coming for me. Before I could respond, a figure emerged at the end of the alley, a large man with a scarred face, flanked by two others. They stepped forward, their intentions clear, and I felt a surge of dread. Caleb! The scarred man called, a sinister smile creeping across his face. You thought you could run from us? Get away from him! I shouted, stepping in front of Monroe protectively. Or what? The man taunted, stepping closer. You're in over your head, girl. Enough! The tension in the alley was palpable, the air thick with impending violence. I could feel my heart racing as I faced the scarred man, adrenaline coursing through my veins. Monroe was behind me, his eyes wide with fear, and I knew we had to act fast. Let him go, I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. He hasn't done anything wrong. The man chuckled, a low, menacing sound that sent chills down my spine. You really think you can protect him? You have no idea what he's involved in. Then tell me, I shouted, the urgency of the moment pushing me to confront him. Why are you after him? Because he knows too much, the scarred man replied, stepping closer. And if he talks, it'll be the end of us all. Talk about what? Jensen asked, stepping up beside me. What is happening? The man glanced back at his companions, who exchanged smirks, and I could sense the danger escalating. You don't want to get involved in this, kids. Trust me. Suddenly, one of the men lunged forward, and I reacted instinctively, shoving Monroe to the side and blocking the blow. The alley erupted into chaos as Jensen grabbed my arm, pulling me back as we dodged the assault. Run! He shouted, and we bolted deeper into the alley, my heart pounding in my chest. Monroe followed closely, the panic in his eyes matching my own. We sprinted through the maze of shadows, dodging debris and trash cans, the sounds of our pursuers echoing behind us. I could hear the men shouting, their footsteps closing in. Which way? Monroe gasped, glancing back as we rounded a corner. The fear in his voice only fueled my determination. Keep going! There has to be an exit up ahead, I urged, not daring to look back. My instincts told me to push forward, to escape whatever darkness was chasing us. As we reached a dead end, I cursed under my breath, searching frantically for a way out. The walls loomed around us, a claustrophobic trap, and I could hear the men approaching, their voices growing louder. Over here! Jensen yelled, pointing to a narrow opening between two buildings. We can squeeze through. Without hesitation, we dashed toward the gap. I felt my heart in my throat as we squeezed through the tight space, the rough bricks scraping against my sides. On the other side, we emerged into a dimly lit street, the night air cool against our skin. Where to now? Monroe asked, his voice shaking with fear. We need to get somewhere safe, I said, scanning the street for any sign of help. Let's find a place to hide, then we can figure out our next move. We darted into a nearby alley that opened up into a small courtyard. The area was deserted, with only the faint glow of streetlights illuminating the edges. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing heart. We can't stay here long, I said, glancing around. They'll be looking for us. Jensen nodded, his face set with determination. We need to find a phone or a way to contact the precinct. They need to know what's going on. Right, I said, my mind racing. We should look for a public phone or somewhere we can get help. As we huddled in the shadows, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The night seemed to close in around us, the silence punctuated only by distant sirens and the occasional shuffle of feet. Caleb, what do you know about them? I asked, turning to Monroe. Why are they after you? He hesitated, glancing around nervously. I've been involved in some bad stuff. I thought I could just lay low, but I saw something I shouldn't have. They think I'm a liability now. What did you see? Jensen pressed, urgency in his voice. A deal going down, drugs, money. It was bigger than I thought. They're connected to a lot of things, and I didn't mean to get involved, Monroe said, his voice trembling. I was just trying to survive. I could see the fear etched on his face, a mix of regret and desperation. You need to tell us everything, I said, trying to keep my tone steady. It could help us find a way out of this. He took a deep breath, his gaze shifting toward the ground. They're connected to the disappearances. I overheard them talking about some of the girls. They wanted to keep it quiet, too many eyes on them already. Which girls? I asked, my heart racing. Sarah and her friends. They thought they could take care of any loose ends. That's why they were after me. His voice faltered, and I could see the weight of his words sinking in. A chill ran through me. This was it, the connection we had been searching for. We need to get this information back to the precinct, I said, urgency flooding my veins. But how? Jensen asked, glancing around the courtyard. We can't just walk out into the open. Just then, a flicker of movement caught my eye. I turned to see a shadow slipping between the buildings at the far end of the courtyard. My heart raced as I strained to see more. Did you see that? I whispered to Jensen. Yeah, he replied, his expression tense. We need to be careful. I gestured for Monroe to stay quiet as I crept closer to the edge of the courtyard, peering around the corner. My heart pounded in my chest as I tried to make out the figure in the shadows. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed through the alley, growing louder and closer. Time's up, I muttered, pulling back. We need to find a way out of here. Just as we were about to retreat, the shadow stepped into the light, a familiar face that made my blood run cold. Caleb! A voice called, and I turned to see one of the men from the bar, a dangerous glint in his eyes. You can't hide forever! I felt a surge of panic as the man advanced toward us, flanked by his companions. We need to go! I urged, grabbing Monroe's arm. Over here! Jensen shouted, pointing toward a door that led into a nearby building. We can hide inside! We dashed toward the door, our footsteps pounding against the pavement. As we reached it, I fumbled for the handle, adrenaline coursing through me. The door swung open, and we rushed inside just as the men reached the courtyard. We found ourselves in a dimly lit hallway, the sounds of our pursuers echoing outside. My heart raced as we pressed ourselves against the wall, trying to catch our breath. What now? Monroe whispered, fear etched on his face. We need to find a way to alert the authorities, I said, my mind racing. There has to be a phone or something in here. Jensen nodded, peering down the hallway. Let's check it out, but stay quiet. As we crept through the building, I could feel the tension thickening with every step. The dim lights flickered overhead, casting eerie shadows that danced along the walls. Finally, we spotted a small office at the end of the hallway. I opened the door slowly, and we stepped inside. The room was cluttered, papers strewn everywhere, but I spotted a landline phone on the desk. Thank God, I muttered, moving quickly toward it. I picked up the receiver, my hands shaking slightly as I dialed the precinct number. My heart raced as the phone rang, each tone echoing my desperation. I was praying for someone to answer. Come on, I urged, glancing back at Jensen and Monroe, who watched anxiously. Finally, a voice crackled through the line. Precinct, how can I help you? Please, this is Officer Starling. We're in trouble. There's a man named Caleb Monroe here, and we need backup. We're being hunted. I blurted out, urgency lacing my voice. Stay calm, officer. Can you provide your location? The dispatcher asked, their tone steady despite the chaos. I'm not sure. We're in a building off Main Street, near the old warehouse district. I replied, my heart racing as I heard footsteps approaching. Help is on the way. Stay where you are, the dispatcher said, but before I could respond, the sound of shattering glass echoed through the hallway. Did you hear that? Jensen whispered, his eyes wide with fear. Yeah, I replied, gripping the phone tighter. They're getting closer. I hung up the phone, adrenaline surging. We need to find a way to barricade the door, I said, glancing around the room for anything we could use. Over there! Monroe pointed to a heavy filing cabinet. We can push it against the door. Together, we rushed to the cabinet, pushing it with all our strength until it wedged against the door. The sound of footsteps echoed louder now, voices growing closer, and I felt my heart pound in my chest. Is this going to hold? Jensen asked, panic in his voice. I don't know, I admitted, fear creeping in. But we have to try. Just then, the door rattled violently, and I felt my breath catch. They're here! I shouted, bracing myself against the cabinet. The men outside began shouting, the door rattled violently, the force behind it making the cabinet shake. My heart raced as the reality of our situation set in. We were trapped, and the only thing standing between us and those men was a flimsy door and a heavy filing cabinet. Caleb, are you okay? I asked, glancing back at Monroe, who was pressed against the wall, his face pale with fear. I don't know, he stammered, his eyes darting around the room. This is my fault. If I hadn't gotten involved in all of this. Stop it, I said sharply. This isn't the time to blame yourself. We need to focus on getting out of here. The sound of pounding on the door grew more frantic, the voices outside rising in anger. We know you're in there, Monroe. You can't hide forever, the scarred man shouted, his tone dripping with menace. We have to find a window or another way out, Jensen suggested, his voice low. If they get in here. I nodded, moving quickly to scan the small office. There were no windows, but the back wall had a door leading to what I hoped was another exit. Let's check that door. We pushed away from the filing cabinet, holding our breath as we moved toward the back of the room. The door looked old and worn, but I hoped it would lead us to safety. I reached for the handle, glancing back at Jensen and Monroe, who watched with wide eyes. On 3, I whispered. 1, 2, 3. I turned the handle and yanked the door open. It creaked loudly, revealing a narrow staircase that led down into darkness. The sound of pounding on the main door echoed in my ears, and I knew we had little time. Let's go, I urged, leading the way down the staircase, the damp air wrapping around us like a cold blanket. Each step felt precarious, but we had no choice. As we descended, the faint sound of footsteps echoed above us, the men still trying to break through the barricade. I could feel the tension in the air, an almost electric charge as we reached the bottom of the stairs and emerged into a dimly lit basement. We paused for a moment, taking in our surroundings. The basement was cluttered with old furniture and boxes, cobwebs hanging from the ceiling like ghosts. A faint light flickered from a bulb hanging overhead. We can hide here for a moment, I suggested, moving to a stack of boxes in the corner. Just until they give up. Monroe nodded, but I could see the fear in his eyes. What if they find us? We'll be quiet, I said, trying to sound reassuring. They might think we went another way. We huddled together behind the boxes, the dim light casting eerie shadows around us. The pounding above Thank you for listening.